Daniel Hayes, CEO of one of the country's largest fast food chains, had always believed he knew his company inside out. From glossy reports to glowing customer reviews, everything seemed perfect on paper. But deep down, a nagging doubt kept him awake at night. Were the smiles on his employees' faces real, or just a mask for the managers and customers? Determined to uncover the truth, Daniel made a bold decision. He would go undercover in his own restaurants, disguised as a regular employee. No suit, no title, just a name tag in the hope of seeing the company through the eyes of the people who kept it running. What he didn't know was that the moment he stepped behind the counter, he would hear something that would shock him. Truth so real and raw that it would change the way he saw his company, his employees, and even himself. Daniel Hayes was the kind of man who had always believed he understood his company completely. As the CEO of a nationwide fast food chain, he had spent years building it from a small family-owned business into one of the most recognizable names in the country. Every morning, he would walk into the sleek corporate office, review reports, talk to managers about profits, customer satisfaction scores, and employee performance. On paper, everything looked perfect. The numbers were good, the reviews were positive, and the company seemed to be running like a well-oiled machine. But lately, Daniel had started feeling a nagging doubt in the back of his mind. No matter how polished the reports were, something didn't feel right. There were whispers of employees being unhappy, customers complaining, and high turnover rates at certain locations. It wasn't that the company was failing, it wasn't, but Daniel could feel that there was a disconnect. The numbers didn't tell the full story. The manager's updates were glowing. But Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't seeing what was really happening on the ground. He realized that to truly understand his company, he couldn't rely on reports, spreadsheets, or secondhand stories. He needed to see it for himself. He needed to experience what his employees experienced every single day: the long hours, the demanding customers, and the fast-paced chaos of a busy restaurant. Most importantly, he wanted to hear the honest thoughts of his staff without them feeling like they were being watched or judged. It was a bold idea even for someone in his position, but Daniel knew it was necessary. The idea of going undercover wasn't new. He had heard of CEOs doing it before, but the thought of actually doing it himself made him nervous. He would have to hide his identity completely and blend in with regular employees who had no reason to trust him. He would be just another person in a uniform, facing the same challenges as everyone else. It was risky, and there was a part of him that worried about making a fool of himself in front of his own employees, but he pushed that fear aside. The chance to truly understand his company from the inside was worth it. He started by carefully planning the disguise. He knew that even a small detail could give him away, so he thought about everything: his hair, the way he dressed, and even his mannerisms. He decided to use a fake name, one that sounded ordinary and would not attract attention. He practiced speaking casually, keeping his tone simple and approachable, because he knew that CEOs often spoke in ways that could make employees suspicious. Daniel wanted to blend in so completely that no one would suspect that the man taking orders at the counter, or making burgers, was the person in charge of the entire company. Once his disguise was ready, he chose one of the busiest outlets in the city for his first shift. It was a location known for long lines and high-pressure service, and Daniel thought it would give him the clearest picture of daily operations. He arrived early, nervous and excited, and was greeted by the manager who had no idea of his true identity. Daniel was introduced as a temporary staff member who had just joined the team. He nodded politely, trying to appear casual, but his heart raced with anticipation. The first few minutes were overwhelming. The noise of the kitchen, the constant chatter of employees, and the smell of fried food hit him all at once. It was a sensory overload, and Daniel realized just how different this environment was from the quiet offices he was used to. He watched as orders came in, employees moved with practiced speed, and the manager coordinated the flow of the restaurant. Everything seemed simple on the surface, but Daniel quickly understood how much skill and coordination it actually required. As he put on his uniform and prepared for his first real task, he felt a mix of excitement and anxiety. He wondered what he would discover, what truths had been hidden behind the reports and meetings. Would he find that the company was truly as perfect as the numbers suggested, or would he uncover challenges he had never imagined? More importantly, he wanted to see how his employees felt about their jobs and whether they truly enjoyed working for the company. Even as he stood there, ready to start, Daniel couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought him here. From running a small restaurant with his family to leading a national chain, he had always prided himself on knowing every aspect of the business. But this stepping away from his office and into the shoes of his employees, felt like the ultimate test. It was a test of his humility, his curiosity, his willingness to see the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it might be. In that moment, as he took a deep breath and prepared to take his first order, Daniel felt a sense of anticipation unlike anything he had experienced before. This was no longer about profits or reputation. It was about understanding, empathy, and connection. He knew that what he learned today could change not only the way he ran his company, but also the lives of the employees who worked tirelessly every day to keep it running. And so, with a mixture of nervousness and determination, Daniel Hayes took his first step into the real world of his business, ready to experience the fast-paced, challenging, and often unseen life of the people who made his company what it was. Daniel Hayes stepped into the restaurant feeling both nervous and excited. The uniform he wore was simple plain shirt, apron, and a cap butt somehow. Putting it on made him feel more connected to the work than he ever had behind his office desk. He took a moment to look around. The restaurant was already bustling with activity. Orders were being shouted out from the kitchen, fryers sizzled with constant energy, and employees moved with practiced precision, handling drinks, food, and customer requests in a smooth, almost choreographed rhythm. Daniel had watched videos and read reports about restaurant operations countless times, but nothing prepared him for the real-life intensity of the environment. His first task was simple: take orders at the counter. Sounds easy, he thought, but as soon as he faced the first customer, the nerves hit him. The person in front of him spoke quickly, rattling off a long list of modifications to their burger and drink order. Daniel fumbled slightly, trying to enter everything correctly into the register. The customer frowned, not out of meanness but impatience, and Daniel felt a flash of embarrassment. He realized immediately that every mistake, no matter how small, had a direct impact on the customer's experience. He had spent years managing the company from a distance, but now he was seeing the real pressure employees faced every single day. As the shift continued, Daniel started to notice details he had never considered. The way employees had to constantly multitask taking orders. Assembling food, cleaning tables, and answering questions was far more complicated than he had imagined. One young employee, barely 20, moved from the fryer to the drink station while simultaneously handling a long line of impatient customers. She smiled, apologized when orders were delayed, and kept moving without losing her rhythm. Daniel felt a wave of admiration. These were the people who kept the business running, and they did it under constant pressure, often for wages far lower than what he earned in a single day. During a brief lull, Daniel tried to strike up a conversation with another employee. He asked simple questions about the job, how long they had been working, and what challenges they faced. The employee answered politely, but Daniel could sense a certain caution. Even though he was disguised, employees were naturally careful about what they said around someone they didn't know. Daniel realized that earning their trust would take time and observation. He decided to stay quiet, listen more, and learn as much as he could without interfering. The kitchen was another revelation. Daniel had assumed that making food was straightforward, following simple instructions from a standardized manual. But in reality, every step required precision, speed, and constant awareness of what was happening around him. The cooks had to keep track of multiple orders at once, ensure everything was cooked perfectly, and deal with sudden changes like a last-minute substitution or a customer complaint. Daniel tried his hand at preparing a burger and immediately struggled with the timing. He burned the edges slightly and realized that even a small error could disrupt the workflow and frustrate both coworkers and customers. He felt a deep respect for the team's skill and endurance. By mid-shift, Daniel began to notice the emotional side of the job. One employee received a call on their break and spoke briefly about family troubles. The stress of personal life mixed with the high-pressure environment created a tense atmosphere, yet the employees supported each other silently. Daniel watched as one worker quietly helped another who had dropped a tray of drinks, and as a small act of kindness. It reminded him that behind the fast service and efficiency were real people with feelings, struggles, and determination. Customers presented their own challenges. Daniel encountered complaints, last-minute requests, and occasional rude behavior. He felt firsthand how emotionally draining it could be to remain polite and professional, while constantly being evaluated by both customers and managers. A woman returned her order because it was slightly wrong, and Daniel apologized repeatedly while trying to quickly fix the problem. The interaction left him slightly shaken, but he also recognized the patience and resilience required to handle such situations multiple times a day. What struck Daniel most was the camaraderie among the employees. Despite the stress, there was a sense of teamwork and humor that kept everyone going. They joked quietly in the back, encouraged each other when mistakes happened, and shared small victories like finishing a particularly busy hour without errors. Daniel realized that this was not just about completing tasks, it was about surviving the chaos together, supporting one another, and maintaining a positive environment under pressure. As the day progressed, Daniel began to understand the subtleties of communication behind the counter. Employees had their own language, a set of short phrases, gestures, and signals that allowed them to coordinate without slowing down. It was a level of efficiency and skill he had never anticipated. Observing it, he realized that many of these practices were developed through experience and teamwork, not through corporate training manuals. He also realized that his company's top-down approach often overlooked these small but essential innovations created by the employees themselves by the end of the shift. Daniel's legs were sore, his hands smelled of fryer oil, and his head was spinning from all the activity. Yet he felt exhilarated. He had survived his first real day behind the counter and had witnessed the intensity, skill, and emotional labor involved in every moment of the job. More importantly, he had started to see the world from the employee's perspective, not as a CEO judging numbers, but as someone who understood the real challenges and pressures of their daily work. Walking out of the restaurant that evening, Daniel reflected on everything he had seen and experienced. He realized that no report or meeting could capture the human side of the business. The employees were not just numbers on a spreadsheet, they were individuals working tirelessly, often unseen and underappreciated. He felt a growing responsibility to ensure that their voices were heard, their struggles recognized, and their work valued. In that first undercover shift, Daniel Hayes had not only learned the practical aspects of the job, but had begun to feel the emotional pulse of his company. He knew this was only the beginning, and that more insights awaited him as he continued to observe, listen, and participate. But one thing was already clear: the company he had built was more than just a brand or a balance sheet. It was a living, breathing community of people, each with their own stories, challenges, and dedication. Daniel had been working behind the counter for several hours, slowly growing more confident in his role. He could take orders with fewer mistakes, move around the kitchen with better timing, and even manage the cash register without fumbling. But what he didn't expect was how much he would learn just by listening something that would completely change his perspective on the company he had spent his life building. It was a particularly busy afternoon, the kind where the restaurant was packed and every employee was moving quickly to keep up with the constant flow of customers. Daniel had just finished taking an order when he noticed two of the employees behind the counter, talking quietly during a brief pause between rushes. At first he thought it was casual chatter, the usual joking and small talk that happened in every workplace. But as he paid attention, he realized that their conversation was different. It wasn't casual at all. It was honest, open, surprisingly personal. One of the employees, a young woman named Mia, was speaking about her struggles outside of work. She had been working 2 jobs while trying to finish college, and the stress was clearly taking its toll. She mentioned how exhausting it was to balance long shifts, late nights and studying, and how little support she felt she was getting from management. Her voice was quiet, but her words carried a weight that made Daniel pause. He had never heard these issues expressed so plainly before, and they hit him harder than he expected. Her coworker, a man named Jason, nodded and added his own thoughts. He talked about his own challenges raising a child on a single income, dealing with bills that never seemed to stop, and trying to meet the high expectations of the company while feeling like he was constantly running out of time and energy. He wasn't complaining. He was simply explaining the reality of life as an employee. Daniel was shocked at how openly they spoke, not realizing he was right there, listening silently behind the counter. What struck Daniel most was the honesty. In the office, he had always believed that employees were satisfied, or at least not unhappy enough to affect the company. He had relied on manager reports and survey results. But these conversations showed him the reality. Many employees were struggling, stressed, and feeling overlooked. He realized that the polished reports he saw every week never captured the emotional and practical challenges of working on the front lines. Daniel listened as Mia mentioned how difficult it was to feel heard. She wanted management to understand how stressful it was to keep up during the lunch rush, how small mistakes could escalate into customer complaints, and how sometimes it felt like the company only cared about numbers and efficiency, not the people making it all happen. Jason agreed, saying that while he loved his coworkers and enjoyed helping customers, there were moments when he felt completely invisible to the higher-ups. Daniel felt a pang of guilt. He had never intended to create an environment where employees felt unappreciated. Yet here was evidence that he had, indirectly, contributed to their struggles. He realized that part of the problem was communication. Managers often focused on metrics, performance targets, and deadlines. And while these things were important for running a successful business, they sometimes ignored the human side of the work. Daniel had always believed that employees were motivated solely by incentives and recognition, but now he understood that respect, understanding, and empathy mattered just as much, if not more. Seeing the genuine concern and frustration of Mia and Jason opened his eyes to a side of the business he had never experienced firsthand. At that moment, Daniel also noticed the teamwork behind the counter. Even while expressing their concerns, Mia and Jason continued to support each other and help the other employees. They shared small tips to manage the rush, encouraged one another, and silently covered for minor mistakes. It was clear that the employees cared deeply about each other in the restaurant, even when they were frustrated with management. Daniel realized that the dedication of his staff went far beyond what could be measured by customer satisfaction scores. They were working tirelessly, often underappreciated, but still committed to doing their best. The conversation then turned to suggestions for improvement. Mia mentioned small changes that could make a big difference: adjusting break schedules, improving the way orders were communicated during rush hours, and providing more support for employees who were struggling with personal challenges. Jason added ideas about training programs that could help new hires adapt faster and feel less overwhelmed. Daniel felt a surge of inspiration. These were real solutions coming directly from the people doing the work every day. Ideas that no corporate report could ever provide. As he continued to listen, Daniel became acutely aware of the emotional toll the job took on employees. They weren't just dealing with customers or cooking food, they were balancing personal struggles, stress, and the constant pressure to perform perfectly under scrutiny. Daniel remembered the exhaustion he had felt in his own first few hours behind the counter. Now he saw that this fatigue was compounded every day, week after week, for thousands of employees across the country. It was more than just physical effort. It was emotional labor. Something he had never considered in his role as CEO. Daniel felt a mix of shock, guilt, and determination. He had always believed he was in touch with his company, but hearing this conversation made him realize how disconnected he had been. The honesty of Mia and Jason, the struggles they shared, and their desire for understanding shook him deeply. He understood that being a good leader wasn't just about making decisions from the office. It was about listening, observing and empathizing with the people who actually made the business work. For the rest of the shift, Daniel continued to observe quietly, seeing the employees' dedication and challenges up close. He noticed small moments that spoke volumes, the quick glance exchanged between coworkers to coordinate an order, the patience shown to a difficult customer, and the unspoken support when someone was overwhelmed. He realized that the employees were the backbone of the company, and yet their voices were often unheard in the halls of corporate headquarters. When the shift ended, Daniel walked out feeling a mix of exhaustion and enlightenment. He had come in expecting to see how work was done, but he left understanding something far more important: the human side of his company. Employees weren't just executing tasks. They were managing emotions, relationships, and personal hardships while keeping the business running smoothly. Their honesty had given him insight that no report, survey, or meeting ever could. That afternoon, behind the counter, Daniel Hayes had learned a lesson he would never forget. He realized that if he wanted to truly lead his company, he needed to pay attention not just to numbers and metrics, but to the voices, struggles, and ideas of the people who worked tirelessly every day. What he heard that day would not only change the way he viewed his employees, but would also shape decisions he would make as a leader moving forward. Daniel returned for his second undercover shift, feeling more prepared but also more aware of the responsibility he now carried in understanding his employees' experiences. After what he had overheard the previous day, he knew he needed to observe even more closely. He wanted to see the real challenges his staff faced, beyond just the rush hours and orders. As he stepped into the restaurant, the familiar hum of activity greeted him: the clatter of trays, the sizzling of fryers, and the constant chatter of coworkers. It was chaotic, but now Daniel could see the layers of effort, teamwork, and personal struggle hidden beneath the noise. From the start, Daniel noticed small details that he had overlooked before. Employees were constantly adjusting to unpredictable situations. A new hire struggled to keep up with the speed of the counter while trying not to make mistakes. Daniel instinctively stepped in to help, but he realized that even his presence could disrupt the flow. He decided to watch and learn instead, studying how more experienced employees move seamlessly through chaos, covering for one another and anticipating problems before they happened. Each movement, each glance, each gesture revealed a system that was far more intricate than any corporate manual could describe. As the lunch rush began, Daniel observed how pressure affected different employees in different ways. One older worker, who had been with the company for years, moved slowly but methodically, demonstrating a deep understanding of timing and efficiency. A younger employee, barely out of high school, raced to keep up, fumbling occasionally, but showing determination and a willingness to learn. Daniel realized that managing this combination of experience levels, personalities, and energy under constant scrutiny was incredibly demanding. It wasn't just about cooking food. It was about managing emotions, maintaining composure, and balancing physical stamina with mental alertness. In the midst of the rush, Daniel witnessed personal struggles intersecting with work responsibilities. Mia, the young woman he had overheard the previous day, was struggling to concentrate because she hadn't slept well the night before. She apologized to customers repeatedly, her voice tinged with fatigue, yet she continued to push through. Nearby, Jason was quietly supporting her, offering guidance on which tasks to prioritize and covering for small mistakes. Daniel could see how teamwork was not just a convenient sit, was a necessity. Employees leaned on each other in ways management might never notice, creating their own support network within the workplace. Daniel also saw the emotional toll the work took on employees. One employee had received a text during a brief break about a family emergency. Daniel watched as the worker tried to mask their worry while continuing to serve customers, their hands shaking slightly as they prepared drinks and handled orders. The stress was visible, yet the employee soldiered on, aware that any delay could impact the rest of the team and the customers waiting. Daniel realized that frontline employees were not just performing tasks, they were constantly managing personal emotions, team dynamics, and customer expectations simultaneously. During a quieter moment, Daniel had a chance to observe the training of a new hire. The employee was nervous, overwhelmed, and making frequent mistakes. Daniel saw veteran workers patiently guiding the newcomer, repeating instructions, correcting errors gently, and offering encouragement. He realized that training wasn't just about following rules, it was about mentorship, empathy, and passing on tacit knowledge that couldn't be written in a manual. Without these veteran employees quietly supporting new hires, the entire operation would falter. Daniel felt a surge of appreciation for the unsung heroes who kept the restaurant running smoothly day after day. Daniel also began noticing how company policies, though well-intentioned, sometimes made the employees' jobs harder. Strict time limits for completing tasks created pressure that led to mistakes. Uniform rules didn't always accommodate personal circumstances. Break schedules sometimes conflicted with employees' personal needs. Daniel had assumed these policies were sufficient, but seeing them in action revealed unintended consequences. For example, an employee who had to take an early lunch to accommodate childcare ended up missing a critical rush of orders, which created stress and tension. Daniel realized that policies needed flexibility and understanding of real-life employee challenges. Throughout the day, Daniel was struck by the resilience and dedication of his staff. Despite the challenges, they remained committed to their work. They celebrated small victories of perfectly completed order, smooth customer interaction, a colleague successfully handling a difficult situation. These moments of pride were fleeting but essential, providing motivation in an otherwise high-pressure environment. Daniel realized that these small wins were as important as the larger company goals he usually focused on. From the office, one of the most impactful moments came when Daniel observed an older employee quietly covering for a colleague who had fallen behind. The veteran worker didn't complain or draw attention to themselves. They simply adapted, adjusted their tasks, and ensured the workflow continued without disruption. Daniel saw that these acts of quiet heroism were routine. Many employees went above and beyond, not for recognition or reward, but out of a sense of responsibility to their team and their customers. It struck Daniel that he had underestimated the personal commitment his employees got to their jobs as the day drew to a close. Daniel reflected on the stories, struggles, and small victories he had witnessed. He realized that the frontline employees' lives were far more complex than he had imagined. Balancing work, personal issues, and the emotional demands of the job required resilience, patience, and teamwork. He also recognized that his role as a CEO extended beyond managing profits. It included creating an environment that acknowledged these realities and supported employees in meaningful ways. Walking home after his shift, Daniel felt a mix of exhaustion and enlightenment. He had learned more in a single day than he had from months of reports and meetings. He understood that leadership required empathy, observation, and action informed by real experiences. The employees he had worked alongside were not just cogs in a machine, they were individuals with struggles, dedication, and insight, whose voices needed to be heard. That day, Daniel Hayes realized that understanding his company meant more than checking numbers and enforcing policies. It meant paying attention to the people who made the business function every day. Their resilience, teamwork, honesty had given him a perspective he could never gain from his office. And he knew that he could no longer view his employees simply as statistics. This experience planted a seed in his mind, a determination to make meaningful changes that would improve the workplace for everyone. Acknowledging both their hard work and the challenges they faced daily, by the end of this shift, Daniel felt a deep connection to his employees, an empathy he had never experienced before. He knew that what he had learned would guide him in transforming the company into a place where employees felt valued, understood, and supported, ultimately creating a stronger, more resilient business. After weeks of working undercover, Daniel Hayes returned to his office with a new perspective that he could no longer ignore. The experiences he had gained behind the counter had opened his eyes too. Realities he had never truly understood from his corner office. The exhaustion, the constant pressure, the emotional strain, and the small victories of his employees had left a lasting impression on him. He knew that if he wanted to be a true leader, he needed to act on what he had witnessed and ensure that the people who ran his company day after day felt recognized, supported, and valued. The first thing Daniel did was schedule a meeting with his top management team. Usually, these meetings focused on profits, sales numbers, and expansion strategies. This time, however, Daniel walked in with a different agenda. He began by sharing his first-hand observations, recounting the experiences of the employees he had worked alongside, the struggles, the challenges and the moments of teamwork and dedication that went unnoticed in corporate reports. He spoke about Mia, Jason, and the other staff members whose honesty had revealed the gap. Between management expectations and the realities of daily work, his executives were surprised, some even uncomfortable, as Daniel described situations they had never considered. They had been focused on efficiency, metrics, and customer satisfaction scores, assuming that employees could handle anything the company demanded. But Daniel emphasized that the human side of the business, the emotions, struggles, and resilience of employees, was just as important as any number on a report. He urged them to rethink policies, schedules, training programs, to create a more supportive environment for their staff. Daniel began by addressing the training system. During his undercover experience, he had seen new hires overwhelmed, unsure, and anxious about meeting expectations. He understood that proper guidance and patience were critical to ensuring employees felt competent and confident in their roles. He worked with the training department to implement programs that were more interactive and supportive, focusing on mentorship from experienced staff, real-life problem-solving, and emotional support, rather than rigid rules and performance quotas. The goal was to help employees feel prepared, not pressured, from their first day. Next, Daniel tackled the issue of schedules and breaks. He had observed how strict time limits and rigid schedules often cause stress, especially for employees juggling family responsibilities or personal challenges. He introduced flexible scheduling options and policies that allowed staff to adjust shifts when necessary without fear of reprisal. He also emphasized that breaks were essential, not optional, for both physical and emotional well-being. By doing so, he hoped to reduce burnout and show employees that their personal needs mattered, just as much as their professional performance. Daniel also focused on communication. One of the most revealing parts of his undercover experience had been listening to employees share their honest opinions and frustrations. He realized that the company had no direct way for staff to voice concerns without fear or hesitation. To fix this, Daniel implemented open channels for communication, including anonymous feedback systems, regular employee forums, and direct access to management representatives. The goal was to create an environment where employees could speak openly, knowing that their opinions would be heard and valued, and that real changes could result from their input. In addition to structural changes, Daniel worked on recognizing and appreciating employees' hard work. During his time undercover, he had witnessed countless acts of dedication covering for a colleague, calming an upset customer, or handling multiple tasks flawlessly. These moments often went unnoticed. Daniel introduced programs that celebrated small achievements, recognized teamwork, and highlighted acts of commitment. From monthly awards to casual shout-outs during meetings, the company began to publicly acknowledge the efforts of its staff. Daniel understood that recognition wasn't just about rewards. It was about respect, morale, and building a sense of pride in the workplace. As the weeks went by, Daniel started visiting restaurants more frequently, not undercover this time. But as the CEO who had learned from experience, he spoke directly to employees, asking about their challenges, listening to their suggestions, and showing genuine interest in their lives. Staff members were surprised at his approach. Some were cautious at first, unsure if he truly understood their struggles, but over time they recognized his sincerity. Conversations that were once filled with frustration and silence began to turn into dialogue and collaboration. Daniel's presence became a source of encouragement, not intimidation. He also made sure that the lessons he had learned reached the corporate culture at every level. Management teams were trained to prioritize empathy, to listen actively to employees, and to consider the human impact of every decision. Policies were rewritten to reflect a balance between efficiency and employee well-being. And managers were held accountable not only for profits, but also for the satisfaction and development of their teams. Daniel knew that changing the corporate mindset would take time, but he was committed to creating a lasting culture shift. One of the most rewarding moments for Daniel came months later, during a visit to the same busy restaurant where he had first gone undercover. The staff greeted him warmly, recognizing him not just as the CEO, but as someone who had walked in their shoes and understood their world. He observed employees working together smoothly, morale visibly higher, and the small gestures of teamwork and care still present, but now complemented by better support from management. He spoke with Mia, Jason, and other employees, hearing how the new training schedules and communication channels had made their work less stressful and more fulfilling. Daniel felt a deep sense of satisfaction in what he had learned. Behind the counter had not only changed his perspective, but had led to meaningful improvements in employees' daily lives. Daniel realized that the undercover experience had transformed him as a leader. He understood that a successful company wasn't just about profits and growth, it was about people. By seeing the human side of the business firsthand, he had learned lessons that no meeting, report, or survey could teach him. He now knew that leadership required empathy, humility, and a willingness to listen. And that true change came from understanding the lived experiences of the people who made the company function every day in the end. Daniel Hayes' undercover journey led to more than just operational improvements. It created a ripple effect across the company, fostering a culture of empathy, respect, and collaboration. Employees felt heard, valued, and supported, while management learned to balance efficiency with humanity. Daniel's willingness to step into the shoes of his staff had not only transformed the workplace, but it also changed him as a person and as a leader, proving that the most important insights often come from seeing the world through someone else's eyes. The company continued to thrive financially, but more importantly, it thrived as a community. Employees worked with pride, customers noticed the difference in service, and Daniel carried the lessons of his undercover experience with him every day. It was a transformation that began with curiosity, humility, and the courage to step into the lives of those he led, ultimately showing that understanding. Empathy in action could create real, lasting change.